Let's start the session with some beautiful guitar playing from John. Well, more people are entering the room.
Hello, welcome to the Fireside chat, which is not really by the fire today, but I'm at the Birdhouse, which is the first urban camp in Hollywood. First urban ecosystem restoration camp anywhere, but it's in Hollywood. And I hope you'll have a chance to learn about this and duplicate it around the world. And today, I'm excited because we're going to have my friend Nick Teasdale from South Africa. And we met about a decade ago, and he's been working on Greenpop. And I think they're doing something which we need to do in all the camps, which is have festivals. And because what we really need to do is have a good time. We've got to make it so much fun to restore the earth that no one can resist it. So I look forward to being with you today and having Misha tell us all about Greenpop in South Africa.
Thank you, John, for this beautiful guitar play. And thank you all for joining the Fireside Chats tonight. Today we have the Fireside Chat with Misha Teasdale, the co-founder of Camp Greenpop in South Africa. Thank you to have you here, Misha. My name is Inge. For those of you who don't know, I'm one of the camp coordinators at Ecosystem Restoration Camps, and I will be your host for tonight. First, I want to go over some house rules. I would like to ask you to please hold your question until after Misha's presentation, because we would like to make a little bit more of an interaction. So after Misha's presentation, you may ask your question by raising your hand. You can also use the reaction button in Zoom, and you can raise your hand by that way. This session will last for 1 hour, but we will facilitate another open discussion So feel free to stay or feel free to leave. But yes, I will first kick off with some news from the camps. First, the camp experiences. Camp Contour Lines in Guatemala is still offering a agroforestry course from 20th of May until the 30th of May. And Camp Greenpop has their Eden Festival of Action on the 27th of June until the 4th of July. And Misha will probably tell you more in his presentation about that opportunity. Then Camp Ambercombe in the UK is planning on a summer event exploring rewilding the lands, ourselves and society. So more news about that will be coming your way very soon. And then Camp Versoleil in France and Camp Habiba in Egypt. Egypt still have their ongoing experience. So if you want to know more about these experiences, please go to our website and see if there's anything that suits you or is nearby you. I know COVID is still an issue, but the camps are starting to get up and going again. So that is exciting. Then some camp news. We are very excited that 9 camps are actually starting. They started already with collecting data on their camps. They will be collecting data on the carbon in the soils, the organic matter, the water retention, the compaction, the erosion versus accumulation levels, as well as biodiversity of the flora and fauna, and the surface temperatures, the changes that's going over time. So we are very excited to have these results in the upcoming months, and we hope to share them with you as we have them. Then Camp Regenesis in the Philippines. They have established a native bamboo nursery to recreate the bamboo forest of the past. But they also sell bamboo for the production of building materials and other sustainable products. And this will help them fund their restoration work. So that's exciting. And then Camp Khalifa in Morocco, they only started in November last year, and they already influenced a young local man who also bought land next to them. So, and he's also restoring the land the same way as Khalifa is doing. So that is very, very exciting news. Yeah, how much inspiration can already give to something else. Then Camp Chocaya in Bolivia, they have been planting nopal cactuses to act as a fire break to protect their agroforest. So they planted 3 rows of cactuses at the edge of their sites, and they will use that as a fire protector. Which is very interesting, and they are also educating local firefighters. They will be trained by city firefighters, and this will help them to protect the area of fires. So that is very interesting news. But now we are going to our main guest, and I would like to introduce you to them by this video. I feel that a video gives you a better impression than only words. So let's enjoy.
Sun keeps calling, and I've been chasing early. Coffee in the morning, it gets way too easy to get my day started. So I'm breathing life. Get to another rhythm and I'm in the flow. Sitting in the back line, waiting for the perfect one. And the waves get washed over me. And the waves get washed over me.
Well, that seems very exciting, Misha. Maybe you would like to take over and explain some more about Greenpop.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I suppose what a gift to be here and such a journey Myself and John met at COP17 in Durban, just 1 year into our adventure. And I suppose I had massive admiration for the work he was doing and could only aspire to be able to follow in his footsteps in some way. So it's, I suppose, quite momentous for us to be here now and to be doing work together. Thank you to all of you. So my name is Misha Teasdale. I'm one of the co-founders and directors of an organization which does work in South Africa and Zambia and Tanzania and Malawi. My journey began when I was 23, I got to drive from Cape Town to London overland. You can change the slide. And that for me was just such a momentous experience of seeing both the best of landscapes and wilderness and I suppose the nature spaces that Africa can present to you, as well as the worst of it, the degradation in Malawi and Ethiopia, and just a lot of the hardship and poverty that's so interconnected. And that experience for me was a real catalyst. I suppose similarly to John, I was working in the media space. I was doing some documentary film work on that trip, and off the back of that, I landed up flying 360,000 kilometers. And I wanted to do something about it, so I decided to plant 1,000 trees. And so we started a campaign in Cape Town. South Africa is an incredibly divided country. There's a lot of hardship, there's a lot of poverty here. And the people that are living in disadvantaged communities, it's very evident in terms of there not being green spaces. So it's kind of like another layer of the social challenges that people are experiencing, environmental challenges in an urban context. And so off the back of the trip, I decided I was going to plant 1,000 trees, and we were going to do that in low-income schools, places where there was no trees. And so we started a campaign to get people from all over Cape Town to sponsor trees and to come and volunteer. And in the first month of Greenpop, it was really just a plan to get those trees in the ground. We used all sorts of creative ways and means to raise funds for trees. We got people to buy little cardboard cutouts that said, "Join the Treevolution." And on the back, there was a number which represented a tree. And we were selling those for like 50 Rand each. It was like €3. And we did all sorts of like fun marketing campaigns and awareness raising campaigns. We got some superhero cloaks made up that said Greenpop on the back, and we got skateboards and rollerblades and BMXs, and we'd ride through rush hour traffic, and we get our friends on the radio to get people in the traffic to honk their horn. So we tell the radio stations, let people know that we're doing this, and if they want to come and volunteer, they're welcome to. And we just got a lot of virility in the beginning, which helped us to get the audience that we needed to plant those trees. And at the end of the month, we'd raised enough money to plant 1,000 trees, and we got the trees in the ground, and it was really exciting and quite daunting. And I suppose the challenge and the amazing thing about it was that the trees just kept on coming. People kept on donating trees, and a lot of people kept on asking, can we plant trees? And companies kept on asking if we can help green schools on their behalf. And so, the journey continued. And you're welcome to change the slide again, Inga. And this was actually an event called the Day of 1,000 Trees. So it took us a month to plant our first 1,000 trees. And a few months later, we thought, let's just create a big event and invite lots of local communities and bring South Africans together and use trees and the restoration of urban spaces as a way to catalyze people into the process of greening their own spaces and creating a celebration around it. And here you can see, I think we had about 500 people that came out that day from local schools and community centers all around the Western Cape, and came and joined us planting trees. It was quite a magic day out. Do you want to change the slide again? And so what do we do now? Well, we're 11 years in. We've grown up a huge amount. We run various programs. We have an urban greening program which focuses primarily on planting fynbos, which is an indigenous plant species here, which is relatively endangered because of urbanization and various other things, alien invasive species. We have a family food garden where we educate people around growing their own food and food sovereignty. We have a lot of environmental awareness campaigns that we run around water education, arts campaigns, etc. And then my favorite thing is that we host tree planting either through our partners on the ground in Malawi and South Africa, and previously in Tanzania and Zambia, and we will, I'm sure, work with them again, through a program called Forests for Life. And you can change the slide again. This slide actually it's a beautiful drone shot of, so this is Knysna, just outside of Knysna. There was a massive fire that happened there in 2017 and 2018. Over 100,000 hectares burnt of non-indigenous vegetation, pine, eucalyptus, incredibly invasive. And I mean, from a fire perspective, it's just a huge fuel load with a lot of oils. And we've worked with numerous partners on the ground to help restore their landscapes. And here you can see the contours of the hills where we've taken the burnt out aliens, cut them down, and made contours to capture the water. And all those little brown dots are where the mulch is that we've been using to plant trees. And if you go there now, the trees are over double head height. It's kind of a subtropical region. It's very rainforesty, unlike in the lower part of the Western Cape where a lot of our trees are planted. And so, yeah, we started this program called Forests for Life, and at community restoration, not specifically trees. It could be landscape management, it could be passive restoration, and then it could be trees in terms of active restoration. If you want to change to the next slide. So this is another example of this forest ecosystem. John's actually been here with us during the time he was in South Africa. And if you look at this landscape today, you wouldn't be able to see all the people in there. So in a beautiful floodplain, the entire thing was covered in non-indigenous species. And now it is abundant with pioneer species, Virgilias, and various others, and then some more specialized secondary species. And there's moss on the ground, there's a lot of mycelium growing, and it's really quite abundant in terms of what's regrowing. Would you change the slide again? One of the things that's been really exciting about our Forest for Life program is not just the plant species that are either being planted or coming back, but also that we're seeing photographic and anecdotal evidence of a lot of keystone species that are coming back into areas, endangered species, semi-endangered species. And here, for instance, it's the Cape Mountain leopard. It's a slightly smaller leopard than the conventional leopard, but you will never spot these. They're very evasive, but beautiful animals. And to see them coming through these spaces that we've been restoring the landscapes. And I mean, for the most part, a lot of these areas are agriculture or degraded because of non-indigenous vegetation, and seeing photographic evidence where there's just these beautiful species that are really, I suppose, the celebrity of species. And, you know, by restoring landscapes and having kind of these species you can hinge on, there's so many other species that lie underneath them that are so dependent on the energy that they bring in terms of having a dynamic ecosystem. Would you change the slide again? So some of our Forest for Life program also looks to work with communities in terms of bringing alternative livelihoods. So for instance, in Zambia, we don't really do tree planting in terms of planting forests. It's more agroforestry, food forests, etc. I'm standing with a gentleman called Lloyd Manyina on the left-hand side. He's a good friend of mine. I've known him since 2012. He rocked up on our planting site in the first year we were in Zambia with his bicycle and some few trees on the front in his basket. And he decided he wanted to join our group. And he was previously a charcoal maker. He was producing charcoal. And then he realized that charcoal production was not a sustainable way of making an income. And so he started growing trees. And we bought thousands of trees from him. And there I'm holding a basket of lemons. We planted, I think, probably 3,000-4,000 lemon trees and other citrus trees in areas where they would previously been planting maize. And we thought, can we make the system more dynamic, more abundant? And so they're doing intercropping, they're planting maize, they're planting cabbages, they're planting a whole lot of other stuff where it was just maize. And they're getting perennials now out of the system. And then just outside of the village, we planted this food forest, which is on the right-hand side. And I think we planted about 12 food forests there. They just look so incredibly abundant. You're welcome to go to the next slide. And then something recently that we've been getting into, I mean, the challenges in many communities is access to energy. And this is something that we've experienced largely in Zambia and Malawi. And so looking at ways that you can complement restoring an ecosystem with also planting high value trees that grow fast and people can harvest by pruning as opposed to cutting down, and using those trees for energy is also quite important. For us, it's a big learning in going into communities and not being prescriptive about stopping cutting down trees, because for me to come in and not understand the local context, especially when people don't have access to energy, it's really critical that you're coming with a solution. And so if people are needing access to energy, and that energy at the moment is coming from wood fuel or from charcoal, you need to create an alternative to that. And if people can prune trees as a means for doing that, then that can be a great option of doing it. The next slide. Here we did a little case study. This is one of our planting sites called Platbos Forest. And we thought it would be really interesting to look at the difference between what happens if we leave a site after we've cleared the alien vegetation and if we plant the site. And this, I think, is probably about 4 years worth of growth. It's a Mediterranean climate, so it doesn't receive too much water. The soil is also incredibly low in terms of nutrients, and so things don't grow fast. But you can see quite explicitly the difference between where a landscape is able to respond productively and regrow forest, and where it's incredibly hard. So you can see on the left-hand image, there's a little patch of green coming back there, but on the right-hand image, it's much more explosive. And there it's quite evident how much more can happen if you plant. And obviously this is in context. In not every space you want to be planting trees. Sometimes passive restoration is a much better way of doing it. In the next slide, you can see, actually, this is a reference to an image I was talking about earlier. So there on the left, you can see when we're planting, and then on the right, you can see a year later after the planting has happened. So the landscape is totally changed from what it was once. And then the next slide, so this is quite exciting. There's a botanical garden just outside of the place where the fires happened. It's called George Botanical Garden. And there what we did was we looked at breaking up a whole bunch of different test sites with regards to different numbers within the types of species. So we had 4 different test sites, and we're still categorizing and checking the data around this, but essentially over several thousand trees, we're able to monitor how the landscape was responding. There were some alien invasive species there. There was a lot of grasses growing there, but it was originally a forest. And there is a much broader landscape that needs restoring. And so for us to be able to work closely with the local ecologists and see it from a scientific point of view and seeing what is the best way of us to approach this to try and really tip the system in the most efficient and least expensive way. If you want to change the slide. Thanks, Anya. So this is just a quick overview of where we're currently working or have worked in the last few years. Our primary operations are in the Garden Route and the Overberg. We also have an incredible project in Hogsback and the Amatoli region. We're working with a project called the Cape Parrot Project, and there it's essentially restoring parrots and various other habitats. There's less than 1,000 Cape parrots left in the wild. And then in southern Malawi, in a place called Malanji, we're working with tea farmers there. And in Zambia, there's a few projects there, but our main one is called Sons of Thunder. And then obviously addressing local threats. We see landscape restoration as in part looking at the landscape specifically where we're either actively planting or passively restoring, but also in terms of fire breaking. In South Africa, much like where John is in California, fires can be part of the ecosystem, but they can also be incredibly problematic. And so we've been working hard to ensure that the places that we're planting are managed in terms of increasing fire breaks and constantly funding those fire breaks, which can be really expensive to manage that on an ongoing basis. Yeah, and so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about our project, the Eden Festival of Action. I mentioned earlier in 2017 and 2018, there was a massive fire that went through the Garden Route, which is in the southern Cape in South Africa. It was a challenge because we had all these alien-based species. They were poorly managed, both from landowners and local government. And then when the fires came through, there was very little that could be done. And so we essentially held hands with a lot of local NGOs, government institutions, even individuals. And we kickstarted an event, and the event is called the Eden Festival of Action. And primarily, we're looking at it from an ecosystem perspective, but then on top of that, it's the societal, it's the social elements. And of course, from an ecosystem perspective, it's increasing biodiversity. So seeing how abundant we can be in terms of the approach of different types of plant species that we can include into the system, and then managing that from a data perspective by looking at bug monitoring, by setting up camera traps, improving water quality and quantity. It is a rainforest, but over the last 5 years, we've seen just increased droughts all around South Africa, and in particularly in this area. Goes without saying, for planting trees and restoring landscapes, carbon is going back into the soil, and that's what we need. Reducing erosion and siltation. There are numerous dams and beautiful bodies of water all around the Garden Route. Some of them are just being used by small local communities, and some of them are essentially providing a water source to much larger communities. And so by us restoring these degraded landscapes, obviously there's this great knock-on effect of supporting those catchment areas and ensuring that there's less siltation that goes into the catchment. I mentioned the reducing of invasive alien species, supporting local conservation bodies. There's just really great people that are working on the landscape, but just generally really underfunded. And the capacity is an ongoing issue. Of course, when you're working at landscape level, creating jobs is something that comes hand in hand. And we have a huge amount of unemployment in South Africa. And so while we also work a lot with volunteers, and we've got a fantastic number of volunteers that are part of our database, we're speaking to, I think it's about 80,000 people across all our networks. We also need to employ people and manage those fire breaks and essentially ensure that people are included in the system. And then employing local businesses to help us with a lot of the work that we do. And then beyond that, we like to have fun. You're welcome to change slides. So a little bit more about the fun. I suppose for me, there's no point in trying to change the world and get people incorporated into this restoration movement unless you make it accessible. And so our whole Eden Festival of Action is really based on the premise that we need to make it as exciting and as engaging and as culturally relevant as possible. So outside of the restoration process, we feel that it's really critical to bring a learning process into it. This year, we're working on nutrients and accelerating health. We're looking at the gut biome and the critical nature of how our internal gut is reflective of our external gut. So if you're living in a system with lots of pollution, like in a city, then your microgut is generally really poor. But if you're in nature and you're working with natural materials, your gut biome can be strong and your immune system can be strong. We have workshops in mycology and looking at how mushrooms can be used to make packaging, to make medicine products for food. We do fermentation workshops. We do medicine music workshops where people can learn about music and I suppose reconnect with themselves through musical workshops. John's participated in a few of those and brought his guitar out, which is really fantastic. We've got a workshop happening this year by a lady called Claire Yanish on biomimicry, which is, for me, a real incredible eye-opening guide, a North Star in terms of how we can change the way we've approached our neoliberal mechanisms, society, economies. If we can use biomimicry as a way to move the world forward by mimicking nature, there's so much to be learned there. And then we have talks and workshops and then evening fireside jamming, and then music nights. I myself am a beginner novice DJ. I like to mix up some tracks, slam together some 80s music. And then many of my good friends are musicians. And so to get people on the stage and on a dance floor and enjoying themselves and celebrating the work that they've done and give them a reason to feel good and feel hope. I feel like right now, one thing that we really need is hope. There's such dissonance and apathy and I suppose also hopelessness out there. And so if we can give people both a reason to celebrate by doing the work and engaging with the landscape in a very meaningful way, we can change that. And if we can give people a reason to celebrate and show them how to celebrate in a very healthy way by looking after themselves and connecting as a community, we can also start to shift things quite considerably. Yeah, and so in the last slide, you're welcome to switch to the last slide. This was at the end of our last big tree planting event before COVID hit. There we planted a few thousand trees on that day. Myself and John planted a tree, and then we went and hung out at a mother yellowwood tree, a Podocarpus latifolius, beautiful 800-year-old matriarch of a tree that has so much wisdom, has seen so much. It was a massively celebratory event, which I'm excited to get back to. I'll be there again this June and July, just for a week of restoration. This year, we've also got some really exciting things happen. We partnered up with the British Council and Baz Art, and we're going to be doing mural art projects around the Western Cape, leaning into the challenges of climate change and plastic pollution and how we can use art as a storytelling tool to exhibit the power of changing mindsets on those fronts. Yeah, we've got some fantastic facilitators coming out. And so if you'd like to come and join, I'd love to encourage you to sign up. You're welcome to go over to the Greenpop page and yeah, come and check it out. It would be, yeah, it'd be really great to give you a high five and a hug and plant some trees with you and do some learning and sharing. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to get into some questions. And a massive thank you to Inge and Kath and John and Peter. I'm so happy to be on this journey. I feel like I've been at this mission for a long time. And for many years, I felt like I'm just kind of soloing. And now there's this tidal wave. And I'm surfing this wave with you guys. And I feel very blessed. So thank you.
Thank you, Misha. Thank you. I just heard from Kath, my colleague, that unfortunately the video didn't show so well for people. I hope this wasn't for everyone. Otherwise, we might want to show it again.
Could I recommend that you just put the link to the thing in the chat, because I don't think it's going to get better.
No, that's really important. I'm sorry for everyone. I thought because I could see it, I thought everyone could enjoy it. But maybe it's good to. I see Kath already put the link in the chat, so thank you for that. Thank you, Misha, for your wonderful story. I feel that there must be loads of questions. John, would you like to kick off the Q&A part?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I first went to South Africa in 1967, and things were quite different then. And I just wondered, on your journey to understand and work together with so many people for ecological function, have you seen the connection to racial justice, social justice, and peace? And can we see that this kind of work is bigger? Really, it's critical that all of these things are interconnected and that we're working for all of them.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's a very challenging space in the context of how dynamic and problematic the South African history is. The adversity here, the previously disadvantaged communities, the extent to which people are disadvantaged, ecology and ecological value is not at the forefront in many people's mindsets, both from a government perspective and from a community perspective. And I think the challenge is that there is this perception around the immediacy of the issue. It's kind of let's deliver food parcels as opposed to showing people how to grow their own food. And so we're constantly just delivering the food parcels. The same goes for the ecology. You know, we have big problems with the fact that we have droughts, periodically massive droughts. And part of that issue is that we have such degraded landscapes. And instead of just curing the landscape, the approach has been to build more dams and to sink more boreholes. So there's this very kind of sense of urgency approach, as opposed to thinking about it in terms of the long term. I wish there was a lot more momentum from a government perspective, but it does feel like it's very slow. What it feels like is that there's these silos of government where people in the environmental space in government understand the issue. And then if you're in mining, or if you're in enterprise development, or if you're in any of the other industries, there is a single-minded agenda, which is, yeah, it's a real challenge. And then I think the communities that are living in rural landscapes, many of which do not have access to energy, and there's a culture of cattle and herding cattle. So grasslands are preferred, and in many places grasslands are relevant, but some places they're not relevant. Like for instance, a lot of KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape, the Transkei. And so many of our remaining coastal forests and coastal thickets are continuing to be degraded. And that's because there's just a real lack of understanding, education, and access to energy or alternatives. Yeah. Does that answer your question, John?
Thank you, Misha.
It begins to. Thank you so much. I have one more question that actually comes up from that. Lately, and for actually quite a long time, the concept of the value of ecological function has come up, and we've also seen these sort of massive programs that are saying, well, let's plant trees, but they value just planting trees at a few, just nothing, or 20 cents or 40 cents or something like this. And this is, it's so necessary to nurture the ecology, not just plant trees. And there's a huge difference between, of course, plantations of monocultures and also, as you note, invasives or exotic trees, which are nothing to do with the ecological function in the area. Has this question of the value of ecological function come up? Because I think what I've been noticing is these marginalized populations could actually be the leaders in restoring the earth. And if they were, they would create so much value. And so if we could spread this concept of the value of ecological function being so much higher than materialism and consumption, and then that would incentivize the activities that would capitalize their activities and nurture them and enrich them. Has that been in discussion in South Africa?
I think it definitely has been in discussion, but it's in isolated pockets. I mean, my understanding of the space at the moment is that there really is a need for a paradigm shift. Environmental projects get less than 1% of funding from a CSI perspective. So it's already fractional. And then there's still an education that's required within that. We have companies that come to us saying, well, if I could buy trees for $1 a tree there, why would I spend $8 with you? Because they don't understand that there's externalized costs within the entire situation. So, well, how does the individual feed into this, and how does the fire break management feed into this, and is there any alternative livelihoods that built into it that are non-timber based, so that people can restore their dignity at the same time? Yeah, I feel like it's a big conversation, and it's not being landed quite yet here in South Africa. Even the concept of restoring landscapes is really limited. Never mind the difference between carbon or trees and the more holistic approach to ecological functionality. And what is the price that we put on a hectare of restored land, as opposed to the 1,000 trees you put in that, or the amount of carbon that comes out of it over a 20-year period? Each one of those is an independent question. The problem is with trees and carbon, it's binary, and that binary narrative is really it's problematic. The challenge is we're not even getting there in South Africa a lot of the time. It's let's build a dam or let's sink another borehole to deal with the issue. That's not to say it's not happening. And, for me, part of my role is to educate, is to say, if we want restored landscapes, we need to be able to see the difference between what we're experiencing now, where fires are a massive issue, where drought is a big issue, where people are disconnected from nature. And we need to see how it can cost a fair amount of money to get there. And it's going to take a paradigm shift in order for us to realize that. Yeah.
Thank you, Misha. Beautiful.
Thank you, John.
I also feel that because that play and music and making it more fun, that it really helps to shift this paradigm shift.
Yeah.
I see the first question from Tahuti Mahat. Are you ready to ask your question in person? Or maybe you're frozen?
Yes. Can you hear me fine?
No, we cannot hear you fine. But maybe.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No?
Yes, I think we can.
Oh.
Okay.
I'm going to shift indoors because maybe if I'm on Wi-Fi is better. All right. My apologies. Can you just confirm that you can hear me now, please?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Good, thanks. So thank you. I'm actually transplanting some trees outside, so excuse the dirt on my face. So I'm really interested in the work that has been shared. And my question really comes from an interest and even a continuation of the dialogue at the last Fireside chat that I was able to participate in, which speaks to John's first question, because I think the issue of kind of misleadership is kind of why the trajectory is the same, even though there's a lot of conversation and dialogue around the environment and a lot of different things. I think our social construct remains the same because the global leaders are still the same. And I'm wondering to kind of reiterate back around to kind of what John was asking about, because there is a history and everybody's very familiar with that history in South Africa, but it's also, I have a lot of comrades who are in what we call South Africa, because they actually choose to not call it South Africa. And those comrades speak a lot about the current continuation of that legacy of colonialism. And I'm wondering if we can challenge ourselves as people in positions of leadership, but the question being, in the work that you just shared and what you're doing, what are ways that you feel you can challenge yourself to hold more space and raise up, especially people as a person of African ascent? I think that knowing that, you know, humanity's unity lies in that common ancestry and also in the reclamation of that legacy of the first farmers and gardeners of the earth. I do agree with John that if those people were able to have the space, which I think is happening because a lot of people are taking that space, to control the narrative to a more restorative narrative overall, you know, across spectrums, because African traditions, pre-colonial African traditions, are not based in dichotomies. They're very holistic. They're whole systems. And because we as a global family are very indoctrinated into a very Eurocentric way of thinking on a fundamental basis, I just really think that challenge is of the utmost importance, and in order to drive this work forward, because the narrative around environmentalism is very much, you know, racist, you know, for lack of a better way of putting it, because I actually think that the construct of race is a falsehood overall, but because most people are already looking at the reality in that way, South Africa is such a unique place because people kind of automatically think of that history and that legacy, but not, but I don't think in the current sense of how it still exists, it's not necessarily being dealt with. So just to reiterate the question, I wanted to give the framework because the narrative around the environment is so much of that kind of like eugenic, even the anti like carbon approach, looking at climate change as a negative thing as opposed to a natural occurrence, and that the planet is, you know, it is changing because that's what it does, and we need to change, and thinking of it in different terms. But yeah, sorry, I said a lot, but just want to know your thoughts on that in the context of your work and your leadership.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that was a big question, and I will try and distill down to something that's clear. I actively work with our team to find spaces and ways in which we are able to bring in individuals that are from Black communities or low-income communities. We have a few different programs. So speaking to the camp we've just advertised, in 2019, we managed to secure 60 plus places for low-income community individuals to be able to come and experience something that normally they wouldn't be able to. For us, obviously, it costs a lot of money to make these things happen. So we'd need to go and put energy and time and effort into creating those spaces for young people to be able to see the environment from a different perspective. You know, if you live in a township or in a informal settlement where people are living in shacks, or they're living in low-income communities, and you're brought into a nature-inspired environment where there are people like John and other up-and-coming environmental leaders, some of them Black, some of them white, coming together and speaking about the environment, thus creating a platform for young people to say, I can be in this, and this is accessible. Because some of the challenges that I've seen is that in South Africa, we have a largely white environmental movement. And I believe that there's a few challenges with that. The reasons for that. Environmentalism has been inaccessible because it's been based on conservation. So you need to go and do a conservation degree, and then you need to go and save rhinoceros or something along those lines. Or it can be quite expensive. And so for us, one of the ways that we try and remedy that is to create opportunities. Another way that we work to try and remedy that is by ensuring that if we have a facilitator lineup or a musical lineup or people that are representing in a leadership position, either through talks or workshops or whatever, wherever possible, bringing in people of color so that it's not Misha in the front of the stage for this 21 days being kind of this demigod of environmentalism. Everyone gets a space and we can create those spaces. And then maybe more to kind of getting into the intricacies of it, we try wherever possible, we generally do them 3 times a week, where we have moderated sessions, which allows for everyone to come together in a circle and talk about any issues that they're feeling. So these kinds of issues, talking about race issues, talking about gender issues, talking about class issues. All of these things are coming up regularly, and we feel that it's critically important to be able to navigate those issues and allow for safe spaces to give all the participants that we're working with a mechanism, a voice to be able to work through how they're feeling and how they see themselves within these communities we create. You know, this event is 100, 150 people for 3 weeks. So people come and spend a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and it's an incredibly exciting, exhilarating experience. It's a life-changing experience. But in the process, it also brings up a lot of questions about one's own reality. And so it's, for us, important to be able to deal with things as they come up. And then more to specifically to our Forests for Life program, we have developed a program to be community-centric. In other words, when we're working with a community that wants to restore their own landscapes, we start by doing a workshop called ABCD, which is called Asset-Based Community Development. And there I would employ a Malawian person or a Zambian person or a Tanzanian person and train them how to do this. And ultimately what it does is it creates a way to move beyond a poverty mindset and gives people an understanding of the assets that they own already, whether those assets are rivers or mountains or soil or a toolbox or a donkey or a wheelbarrow. And by understanding the assets that people have, what people are able to do is then pair the challenges that they have and move themselves into a place of going beyond the headspace that development is going to save them. Because the challenge that I've experienced in much of our African development work is that there is this poverty headspace that someone else is going to come and they're going to bring money and they're going to bring all the experts and they're going to solve the problems for us. And what we believe is that there's a much more holistic way of doing that, and that is to create facilitation mechanisms which allow for people to bring their own resources to the fore, and then see how you can use ecology to be able to bolster that. Use non-timber based livelihoods like beekeeping or superfood collection or insect collection, to be able to support communities and train communities, and using local facilitators. Doing training, a Zambian in Zambia doing the training, because they're the best person you could find on the ground. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. I know it's a very big question and it's a very challenging time because there's all these intersects of issues that we're dealing with on a planetary level, based on gender and race and ecology, speciesism, and yeah. And I suppose one of the things that you asked is like, is it our role to restore the planet? Is climate change going to happen anyway? And what is our plan for that? And that's definitely a question that we ask ourselves. Are we planting to restore what was, or are we planting to create functional ecosystems for what is going to be? And that is part of our planning mechanism when we're essentially rolling out our concept notes. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experience.
Thank you, Tahuti. Where are you messaging from? Where are you calling in from?
So my name is actually Neff, and I'm calling in from Cabo Verde Islands off the west coast of Africa, close to Senegal.
Okay.
But the organization that I co-founded is called Tahuti Ma'at, so that's what's on the screen. And we're hoping to do an ecosystem restoration camp. I did apply for one.
Amazing. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your question and thank you for your answer, Misha. Are there any other questions? If so, you can raise your hand or you can raise your hand via the reactions button in Zoom. I still have a question, Misha, because I can imagine that once you're starting a project that you really need to find the right partners to set this all up and find the energy and the coalition to start it. Can you tell me a little bit about your partnerships? Or maybe I'm assuming that you have multiple, but maybe you're not.
So we get applications on a very regular basis for people to restore landscapes. I almost see Greenpop as kind of a Africa version of ecosystem restoration camps, in that we have many of our own camps, but we don't see them as camps as much as just they're forest communities that need support in restoring their own landscapes because they don't understand the ecological context in its entirety, or they don't have the resources, or they need support in creating the monitoring and evaluation. And so what we do is essentially we have an application form and people go through the initial stages of that. And then beyond that, we would take people, whoever that forest community is, through a much longer and more robust kind of interview process. We are poised to scale. We're hoping to restore a huge amount of landscapes, but for us, it's critical to have the right partners. And so we start with just a few trees or a few hectares and see how that feels, see if the partners are sufficiently motivated to really bring all their energy. And we're essentially working in a way that we want them to feel like this is a long-term collaboration and that the restoration of those ecosystems are going to be broadly beneficial. And it's not just for one individual who's motivated, it needs to be an entire community. And when the restoration happens, they all come out and they're all part of the process, and that it's interconnected with other things, which could be the alternative livelihoods or farmer managed natural regeneration, or managing of an alien invasive species. So yeah, it's kind of looking at that holistic approach and then seeing who's applying. I wish we could be working with all the partners. We just have so many that have applied. It's quite overwhelming. And it's really just a case of funding. You know, if the funding was there, we could do amazing things, much the same as you guys, I suppose.
Yes, yes. Could you share maybe a little bit with everyone what you were doing to get all your projects funded? I can imagine that it's, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure. So for our one project, Eden, we have a program called Trees for Fees. And so if you raise 80 trees through an online platform, those trees are 120 Rand or about $8 each. We essentially use those trees to plant in our program, but we also provide the person who's the fundraiser with a free placement for a week, which covers their food and accommodation and transport on the ground and workshops and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really great kind of exchange of value. And what's fantastic about it, more than that, is that, Inga, for instance, if you were doing Trees for Fees and you are excited about it, say you are in university and you're like, I want to go to Eden Festival of Action, it's happening this time next year, I'm going to do a tree raising campaign. In the process, you would go and speak to 80 of your friends and say, I want to do this. Or you would have a dinner party or a cinema night or some sort of fundraiser. And so by virtue of doing that, we find that there's this kind of catalytic fundraising approach where one person tells 80 people. And in the past, we've had, I think, over 80, 90 people do it for one event, raising 500,000 Rand to restore landscapes. So we found it to be really quite a productive way of doing it. It takes a lot of work, but it can raise a lot of funds. And it actually was born out of our first restoration event. we had two challenges. We didn't have enough people booking, and we didn't have enough trees in the tree bank. And we thought, how are we going to solve this? We asked people, why aren't you booking? They said, look, we can understand why it costs this much, but we just can't afford it. So we thought, well, would you raise trees to come? Yeah, we could do that. And it's a lot easier for you to go. It's like, my birthday, will you buy me a tree? Then say, it's my birthday, would you buy me a ticket to go to this event? And then other ways that we raise funds for trees, we have a program called a pledge, and there we get businesses to pledge trees on an ongoing basis. It could be based on hotel nights, it could be based on soft drinks, flights flown. We've even recently started our own coffee brand called Arise Coffee. It's a fair trade coffee from Malawi. We import it from Malawi, we roast it here in South Africa, in Cape Town. And many of our favorite online retailers sell it, and a lot of our corporate partners sell it. And it's just a really great commodity to be able to activate a mechanism around trees. For every 3 kilograms, we plant a tree. It's really easy for people to understand. So I can go to a corporate office and say, right now you're drinking 1,000 kilograms a year of coffee. Can we turn that into 350 trees? You don't have to spend any more money. And so it's a really great kind of exchange using a resource that's already happening. And then we have a campaign called Race for Trees. And we partner up with a lot of our marathons and mountain bike races and people that are climbing. We've had people climb the Himalayas for trees. And there we set them up a profile, and they will essentially do some sort of race or marathon or something in the name of trees. And our trees, as I mentioned earlier, they're priced quite high, and that's because it includes the whole landscape. It's a holistic approach. So if someone says, why do your trees not cost $1? We'll send them a concept note, and it'll include all the nuts and bolts of the fact that our trees cost what they need to cost. In fact, they should cost more, but we are finding ways to subsidize it because a lot of people also donate with no expectations. So they just donate, and then we are able to fund from that as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, interesting to hear that word of mouth actually is still the strongest way of gaining funds.
100%.
And, yeah, as well, if people are funding for trees, then they also spread the word and make Greenpop more aware under the people. Cool, I like that. Are there any other questions from anyone? I know that Peter would really love to share something. Peter, would you like to take over?
If there are no other, because what I'm going to share is sort of like a closing thing, and then that kills any conversation. So if anyone has something to ask or discuss, we can do it.
Are there any? I see. Yeah. Arnoldus. Please ask your question.
This is better, I think. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Well, I would. This is the first time I am invited to this camp event and this chat event, and I find it very interesting to hear what's going on in the different camps around the world, and I also find it very interesting that the amount of camps are growing each year. And it's also very necessary. And I would very much like to thank Misha for his words this afternoon and the way they are working in the camps in South Africa, and especially the other countries around South Africa. It's a big job what he's doing, and I would like to thank him for his presentation this afternoon, and I hope to see some more of these events in the coming time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, wonderfully said. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
That's a great compliment, Misha. You are doing a great job, and everything just started with a little seed in your hat. I think that's amazing that you thought of something and you made it a reality. You probably couldn't imagine while you were driving up to London that this would be your future.
Yeah, I mean, it all seems very overwhelming to me, but I'm feeling very blessed, and I feel like the time is right. There's been a long gestation period, a lot of energy, and yeah, a really good intention from so many people, and I feel like it's all now culminating. I mean, just some of the magic that me and Peter have been discussing with our team of late, collaborating with the UN Decade. Yeah, it just feels like there's just these key moments that are unfolding, and the trajectory feels really quite massive. And a lot of the time feel grossly underprepared and very excited.
Yes, well, thank you very much.
Shall I? It is a bit overwhelming, right, Misha? It is a bit overwhelming. There's so much happening right now. And you turned off your video, but I see the organization, Tehuti Mayat, working very hard in the background. So even though we have process and procedures, but as a director, I don't see any reason why not to include you in the ecosystem restoration campus movement. If you even continue working while on a Zoom call. But as three things I would like to say, I'd like to invite everyone here. World Environment Day is speeding at us. And it's also the time where the United Nations officially launches its UN decade process. And as ERC, we're doing one thing on our own, and that is we're organizing a live-streamed debate or roundtable discussion on ecosystem restoration and refugee camps. It will soon be published, I think, on our social media channels what the exact times are. But on the 5th, you can choose between 2 time slots for a discussion there with organizations involved with refugees and John and others involved in greening, and see if the two can be brought together. It's a start of a conversation, a very difficult conversation. And the second one is, and that's what Misha has been talking about, is a session that we're organizing together with Greenpop, and we're very pleased that the United Nations deemed it worthy that we can close the official opening session with our joint workshop on the 5th. It starts at 5 o'clock UTC, and everyone can look in their own schedules when that fits your time zone, where we're going to talk about exactly what Misha touched upon at the end about, what is the price of a tree. We call it going beyond the tree. We are noticing in our work that we are confronted often with a decision somewhere that the tree should only cost 20 cents or $1, and that 1 million or 1 trillion or hundreds of trillions should be planted immediately. And we hope that we can start the discussion to think about ecosystem restoration differently. That what in the end we're trying to achieve is what communities need, what people that live in degraded lands or are inspired by new models would like to do. That trees play a role there, but that ecosystem restoration and even the planting of a tree is something that should be done in a considered way. And what we hope to end up with and charge everyone involved in this UN decade is the challenge to think about ecosystem restoration in different terms than mere tree planting. There's so much tree planting going on, which is great. We're not against that. But ecosystem restoration is more than just planting trees. And that discussion seems to be disappearing a bit because humans have the tendency to make everything simple and easy. It isn't simple and easy. And if you go from the community perspective, you'll find that it's great to decide that 1 trillion trees are needed, but maybe the community doesn't want to be living in a monoculture of trees around them. So that's what we're going to discuss. We're refining it because we were kind of surprised by the invitation. So we've been talking for the past week, and I hope we'll have 2 great events for you to follow on the 5th. One on refugees and ecosystem restoration, and one on going beyond the tree.
Thank you, Peter. Will this be announced via our newsletter?
Oh, absolutely. I think tomorrow already. So if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter, do it now, and otherwise keep an eye on social media or our website. But everyone here is getting our newsletter, so you should see these invitations tomorrow. And
Peter?
Yes, John.
I think you might consider the title of Missing the Forest for the Trees.
Almost, huh? Yeah. Yeah. So hope to see you then.
Thank you.
And I thought it was a great discussion, by the way. The human aspect of this, which was raised, I think is an important one. So who are we as humanity in relation to the ecosystem is a big one. We'll keep on that.
Yes. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Misha, for sharing your story and being inspiration for us all. And thank you, John, for joining this Fireside Chat. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to learn more from each other. And I think this is so valuable for all of us. So thank you for being here. John?
Does anyone want to stay after and just chat a bit informally?
If people want to, they're open to stay. Maybe
I would love to.
But obviously anyone who needs to go should feel free to leave. But if anyone wants to have a little less formal, we can all unmute and talk with one another, perhaps.
Yes, we could do that. People, if you feel free, if you want to leave, but if you want to stay for an open discussion, then you can stay.
Can I just say goodbye to everyone? Thank you so much, John and Inga and Peter, and yeah, the camps and camps to be, and yeah, everyone here. Thanks for being part of this movement. There's a lot of work to be done. Let's have fun doing it. All right. Have a lovely evening and enjoy your chat. Cheerio.
Thank you, Misha.